Theater of the mind is a phrase I think we've started taking for granted. A large contingent of D&D players were brought to the game by Tolkien or other fantasy literature after reading those works and developing an insatiable desire to kiss a dwarf, and I understand this. I mean, who wouldn't want to mac on Gimli a bit? But I think there's a gold mine of advice waiting for us just around the bend in a land forbidden by feuds of old. The stage. Yes, I'm going there. I'd never go so far as to call myself a theater kid, but I do have a love for the art form, and I especially love reading scripts. I love getting lost in a new world for a couple hours, meeting new characters, watching those characters interact, seeing what situations they get into, and... Wait a minute. This sounds a lot like Dungeons and Dragons. Well, surprise! D&D and theater share a lot of qualities. I already knew that. That's why I started writing this video. But now you know it too. Like I said at the top, we've started taking the theater and theater of the mind at even less than face value. Many people try to avoid theater of the mind at all costs by printing a million miniatures or creating battle maps for any possible situation. And don't get me wrong, I love those things. I mean, I bought a pretty printer. But I think this fear of theater of the mind comes from seeing that of in the phrase as theater in the mind rather than theater from the mind. Now hold up. Why am I spitting proverbs like one of the authors whose books I skimmed in theater school? Isn't this pretension exactly why people don't like theater kids? And I tell you, the answer is complicated. Not to that second question. That one is just yes. But to answer the first question, I wish there was a way to put it without sounding like a literature professor that everyone hates. That I think this distinction of in and from is actually key to understanding why some people, including myself, love theater of the mind. This concept is kind of abstract, though, and this whole video is kind of going to be that way, so buckle up. And I also understand that the scene-heavy style of play that I'm going to be going over definitely isn't for everybody. This video is specifically for people who are struggling with roleplay, or every downtime feeling the same. It's for anybody who wants to make their story feel a little more real. So am I just going to go full video essayist and tell you what you already know, that imagination is cool and that you should use it? No. This video is still going to be a numbered list, like you clicked on it for, and it's also going to kind of be about theater, like you didn't click on it for. But this intro is running long, so I'll summarize what I mean succinctly. If you're creating theater in your mind, you might know exactly who your character is, but nobody else is going to be able to see it. If you're using your mind as the play space where decisions are made, you're seriously limiting what can be achieved with roleplay. But in this video, I'll go over a couple of tips for players and DMs who want to bring the theater out of their mind and onto the table. And maybe, just maybe, your next session can feel a little more real.
See you at improv practice.
I've made an enemy of a man I've never met. If you know, you know. Big old disclaimer for this next section specifically. I have not only pitched a tent in, I am a park ranger watching over the camp that improvisation is intrinsically tied into the fabric of D&D. Not improv comedy, sorry. That was intense. I'm very passionate about this. It's just improv itself. Yes, some campaigns, especially pre-written ones like Curse of Strahd, call for a little bit less of it. But you cannot prepare for every single thing that your players are going to do. It's impossible. So, especially for DMs, you've got to be able to think on your feet a little bit, okay? Okay. And so Oxford Dictionary defines improv as some bullshit, I don't know. But what I define improv as is creating from the circumstances, looking at what you're given and saying, okay, this is what I do with this. This can apply to comedy, but it also applies to what we do in D&D. We say, okay, this door has a lock the size of Rhode Island on it. Thankfully, the paladin's hammer is the size of Delaware. Just like in stage improv, there is always a key. There is always a clear path to an ending. But the reason we enjoy playing is to take the scenic route sometimes. Sure, if a townsperson runs into the square screaming, "My husband is dying," that's a time to let the cleric do their thing. But, you know, I trust you to be able to make the right call on when a little improv is appropriate. So, now that we've delineated improv in general from improv comedy, let's talk about how improv comedy teaches us about improv in general. There's a lot, but I'll break it down into 2 main points. A, every scene has stakes. B, every scene has an arc. How many times has this happened to you? Okay, so now I'll give you guys an opportunity to roleplay a little bit. I used to do this. Oh, how I used to do this, thinking I was giving my players the spotlight, when all I was doing was putting them on the spot. If you're the DM, start the scene with something. It could even be as simple as tying a knot in 2 wet ropes after a day of heavy rain. If they don't get these knots tied, their shelter won't go up and they might be attacked by animals while they sleep. This is also where the mechanical side of D&D can come in. Make a couple of rolls to determine how they do tying these knots. Bad rolls open up opportunities to roleplay and problem solve, therefore reinforcing relationships between the party members. Good rolls open up opportunities for players to talk about how they once took a knot tying class in the Boys Brigade of Praetoria, which then opens up roleplay opportunities as well. It's a win-win. And as the player, don't be afraid of opportunities like this. If you roll well, try not to say simply, I do it. Say a witty one-liner and describe how smug your character looks after doing something so important. There are a million things you can do or say that don't involve simply saying, I do it, or describing how you tie a knot. Something I struggled with for a long time was, why should I do things like this? Why should I pointlessly create stress for my players? Shouldn't I make every scene important to the plot? But this becomes exhausting for both player and DM after a while, trust me. It's old advice, but it often gets forgotten. Don't be so focused on the next plot point that you forget about the journey. A scene's purpose doesn't have to be to move the plot forward. A scene can create tension, relieve tension, establish exposition, establish a setting, create character, or this is an opportunity we get only in RPGs. A scene can be entirely irrelevant, existing only to establish relationships. Now, the second rule, which is a little bit trickier, and I am going to explain it, don't you worry, but it makes a little more sense later in the video, so stay tuned and give me a little more time. In short, just try to remember, roleplay is an opportunity, not an assignment. To set a scene, you need a set. A scene's not a scene without a set. A set is used to set the scene, so for a scene, you need a set. So make a set to set your scene, and then a scene is what you'll get. Another day, another dime, another rhyme, another dollar.
Another stuffed shirt with another white collar.
I think even people who don't like theater can appreciate a good set. Every single detail is physically crafted to enhance the world. Unlike a book where descriptive imagery is our only key to understanding what the world looks like, theater is literature meant to be seen and not read. This is where the phrase theater of the mind really comes back into play. In D&D, we tread in a no man's land between the visual and the written, the verbal. But here's the thing. Playwrights tread in this same place. When a playwright writes a play, they have to write in a way that brings imagery to mind. Otherwise, no director will direct, no actors will act, and no audience will see. But they also have to create images that can be understood in a physical sense, as these are the settings that their characters will explore. And this seemingly contradictory responsibility to create visuals that are both interesting conceptually and also achievable physically is one shared by DMs and players alike. There are multiple ways to go about describing a scene. Death Trap by Ira Levin really leans into describing every single detail down to the draperies in the windows. It's great for a kind of scene you'll be spending a lot of time exploring, like a place with a lot of puzzles. Any place you'll inspect very deeply. On the other hand, Born with Teeth by Liz Duffy Adams keeps it setting to one sentence. The back room of a bar. It doesn't even name the bar. At first, this seems contradictory to our goals. Shouldn't we want to go the Death Trap route and describe everything in detail? Well, A, not every scene requires that much detail, and B, the setting is still described, just through dialogue and stage direction. Stage direction is something a lot of us do, but not many of us realize it. He crosses to the acid pool and draws a long sigh would be one example, a simple one. But Death Trap once again goes about it in an interesting and different way. It again chooses the path of meticulous detail, really describing how its characters are feeling and thinking and moving. And this can achieve two great things: tension and comedy. It all depends on the situation. Is the villain running a knife along someone's throat? Or did the dwarf just stub his toe? Either could be filled with tons of colorful and descriptive language. Both achieve different things. Born with Teeth can be referred to a second time as an example of simplicity, only suggesting movement and usually not describing how his characters feel in the stage directions. This, again, might seem counterintuitive, but think of a scene of two people simply walking along the street. Keeping descriptions light not only achieves a conversational tone, but also makes something as small as they turn the corner hold weight. Both methods of description are valid. And here's the beauty. You can do both in one campaign, in one session even. It's once again all about the stakes of the scene, baby. Stakes. Are you grilling a barkeep? Or grilling steaks? Or confronting a big bad? Both are important scenes, but they require different amounts of detail. The barkeep scene, born with teeth. The big bad scene, death trap. I hope this distinction makes sense.
Insane.
I have to confess something to you folks. I've cheated on D&D. And by that I mean I've played other TTRPGs. My favorite is Fiasco. Now, me and my buddies kind of play Calvin Ball with the rules a little bit, so I'm not going to try to explain them to you. The basis of the game is you improv a movie through pretty loose interpretations of several prompts that you get at the beginning. But this game is where I get a lot of my ideas of scene writing. Earlier in the improv section, I mentioned a second rule. That's right, we're finally getting back to that. Every scene has an arc. This can be seen very broadly as a beginning, middle, and end. But, as you were probably taught in literature class, the arc of a story more usually looks like this. Now, what if I told you every scene is its own little story? Fiasco really emphasized this, both encouraging plot movement through its prompts, but also through its assignment of a special role to one player. In some scenes, one player would be given the role to end it. Seems simple, right? In D&D, this responsibility is most often thrust upon the people in the scene, leading to many a situation of uncomfortable silence and DM prompting. But I would encourage everybody to feel empowered to say, I think that's a good stopping point. Let's move on. At the very least, have a conversation with your table and see if this is a boundary you're okay setting. Now, not every scene has the same level of detail, like we discussed earlier, but every scene has to have a beginning, middle, and end. Now, you might be thinking, obviously, every scene has to end, otherwise they'd go on forever. But when I say end, I mean conclude, as in come to a conclusion. And don't forget about that middle. If a scene is a sandwich, that's our filling. A beginning and an end are our bread. They're necessary to create the sandwich, but the filling makes it delicious. Let's go back to our knot tying example from earlier and apply a little of what we learned so far. A tent, tightly strung on one side and loose on the other, hangs between two trees. The paladin and the rogue fiddle with ropes in the corner. A roll of 7 from one and a 9 from the other determine the circumstances. After several attempts, in a near case of rope burn, both give up and fall back, much too out of breath for such a simple activity. After a moment, the paladin stands up, walks over to the rogue's feet, and offers a hand. The paladin sighs after a moment and says, "Man, I am not doing my boys proud." The rogue looks at him, confused for a second, not knowing the paladin to belong to any organizations, at least not currently. The paladin looks in the eyes of the rogue woefully and says, "The Boys' Brigade of Pretoria." And they both burst into laughter. It's going to be a long night, but at least they have each other. And the scene ends naturally, and it took, 30 seconds? Painless. And did you notice how it follows our little arc chart? Rising and then eventually falling? Beautiful. Really ties my heart in knots. It does so much to establish character, too, even dropping a little backstory nugget in there for the player who sent you a document longer than some modules when you asked for their character's deal. This seemingly meaningless 30-second snippet might not even be remembered in the grand scheme, but I think it accomplishes something still very significant. And remember, if every scene is too important, the player's brains will fill up and overheat. I talked earlier in this video about theater from the mind, but the truth is, it's literally just letting your intrusive thoughts win. If you have a thought as your character, don't sit there considering it. Your character certainly wouldn't. You're not your character's filter, or their mom, trying to make them behave, or make everything they say matter. This is theater in the mind. So then theater from the mind is simply living with what comes to you. Living in the circumstances, out and on the table. Improvisation, just like we talked about earlier. So, embrace your inner theater kid, read some Arthur Miller, dress up like a cat, and DM like a playwright, and I'm sorry for saying that sentence goodbye.